5:29 a.m., July 16, 1945. In a remote, desolate corner of the New Mexico desert, the sky did not wait for the sun to rise. Instead, the earth itself tore open. A flash of light, brighter than 1,000 suns, blinded the horizon. It was silent at first. Then came the roar, a sound so deep it rattled the bones of the men watching from bunkers miles away. The sand of the desert floor melted instantly into green glass. A mushroom cloud clawed its way 10 miles into the atmosphere. Watching this terrifying beauty was a thin, chain-smoking man named J. Robert Oppenheimer. As the cloud rose, a line from ancient Hindu scripture flashed through his mind. "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." In that single second, human history was severed in two. There was the world before the bomb and the world after. This is not just the story of a weapon, it is the story of how humanity unlocked the power of the stars, and in doing so, handed itself the power of ultimate destruction. This is the complete history of the atomic bomb. To understand how we got to that explosion in the desert, we have to go back to a time when the idea of a nuclear bomb was considered science fiction. In the early 20th century, the atom was seen as the stable building block of the universe. But in the 1930s, the world of physics was turned upside down. In 1938, in Berlin, German chemists Otto Hahns and Fritz Strassmann made a discovery that shouldn't have been possible. They bombarded uranium atoms with neutrons and found that the uranium nucleus could actually split in two. It was called nuclear fission. When an atom splits, it loses a tiny amount of mass. According to Einstein's famous equation, E equals mc squared, that tiny loss of mass is converted into energy. A lot of energy. The scientific community realized something terrifying. If you could cause one atom to split, and that split caused two more to split, and those two caused four, you would have a chain reaction. In a fraction of a second, you could release the energy of a mountain of dynamite from a piece of metal the size of a grapefruit. This discovery didn't happen in a peaceful vacuum. It happened on the eve of World War II. Hitler was marching across Europe. The brilliant minds of physics, many of them Jewish refugees who had fled Nazi persecution, realized the danger immediately. If Hitler got an atomic bomb, he would not hesitate to use it. He would rule the world. Driven by this fear, a letter was written. In 1939, Leo Szilard and Albert Einstein wrote to the President of the United States, Franklin D. Roosevelt. They warned him that the Nazis were securing uranium mines. They warned him that a new type of bomb was possible. Roosevelt listened. He authorized a secret committee to look into uranium. But for 2 years, progress was slow. It wasn't until 1941, when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor and America fully entered the war, that the project shifted into high gear. The race was on. In 1942, the United States Army took control of the atomic research. They codenamed it the Manhattan Project. It would become the largest, most expensive, and most secretive industrial project in human history. To lead it, the Army chose a man who was the polar opposite of a scientist, General Leslie Groves. He was gruff, demanding, and obsessed with security. To lead the science, Groves chose J. Robert Oppenheimer. It was a controversial choice. Oppenheimer was a theoretical physicist, not an engineer. He was eccentric, smoked constantly, read poetry in Sanskrit, and had left-wing political associations that made the FBI nervous. But Groves saw something in him, a force of genius and a burning ambition. They needed a place to build the bomb, somewhere isolated, far from spies and prying eyes. Oppenheimer suggested the high desert of Los Alamos, New Mexico. Almost overnight, a secret city was built. They gathered the greatest minds on the planet, Nobel Prize winners, mathematicians and engineers, and moved them and their families to the middle of nowhere. They disappeared from the known world to solve the hardest physics problem ever attempted. The pressure was crushing. They weren't just doing math, they were inventing an entirely new industry. They had to figure out how to enrich uranium, a process that required factories the size of small cities. They had to figure out how to manufacture plutonium, an element that barely existed in nature. At Los Alamos, they developed two different designs. The first was Little Boy. It was a gun-type bomb. It worked by firing a bullet of uranium into a target of uranium to create a critical mass. It was simple, but inefficient. The second was Fat Man. This used plutonium, but plutonium was unstable. You couldn't shoot it like a gun. It reacted too fast. The scientists had to invent a way to squeeze a plutonium core using conventional explosives, compressing it inward perfectly evenly. This was called implosion. It was an engineering nightmare. For 3 years, they worked 6 days a week, often 18 hours a day. They worked with the constant fear that the Germans were ahead of them. But by 1944, Allied spies discovered the truth. The German atomic program was a failure. Hitler had not invested enough in it. The Nazis were nowhere close. Yet the American project didn't stop. It accelerated. The target shifted to Japan. The momentum of the project had become unstoppable. They had spent billions of dollars. They had built the weapon. They had to know if it worked. This brings us back to the desert in 1945. The gadget, as they called it, the plutonium implosion device, was hoisted atop a 100-foot steel tower. The tension the night before the test was unbearable. There was a thunderstorm. Lightning lashed around the tower loaded with explosives. General Groves and Oppenheimer argued over whether to delay. There was also a dark, secret fear among some scientists. A few calculations suggested a tiny possibility that the heat of the bomb might ignite the nitrogen in the atmosphere. They feared the chain reaction wouldn't stop at the bomb. It would set the air on fire and burn up the entire planet. They checked the math again. They decided the risk was near zero. They proceeded. At 5:29 a.m., the Trinity Test was successful. The blast was far larger than anyone anticipated. It vaporized the tower. It was felt in 3 states. A blind woman miles away claimed she saw the light. A coded message was sent to Washington. The baby was born. President Roosevelt had died months earlier. Now President Truman had to make the decision. The war in Europe was over, but the war in the Pacific was brutal. Japan refused to surrender. The U.S. military predicted that a ground invasion of Japan would cost 1 million American lives and millions of Japanese lives. Truman issued an ultimatum: surrender unconditionally or face prompt and utter destruction. Japan did not respond. On August 6, 1945, a B-29 bomber named the Enola Gay flew over the city of Hiroshima. It carried Little Boy. At 8:15 a.m., the bomb was dropped. It fell for 43 seconds. When it detonated, the temperature at the center was hotter than the surface of the sun. People near the hypocenter were instantly vaporized. All that was left of them were their shadows burned on the pavement. Birds ignited in mid-air. Within seconds, the city was flattened. 70,000 people died instantly. Tens of thousands more would die from radiation poisoning in the days and years to come. The world was in shock, but Japan still did not surrender. The Soviet Union declared war on Japan, invading Manchuria. 3 days later, on August 9th, the U.S. dropped the second bomb, Fat Man, on Nagasaki. Another 40,000 people died in an instant. On August 15th, Emperor Hirohito announced the surrender. World War II was over, But a new, colder terror had begun. The scientists at Los Alamos reacted with mixed emotions. There was relief that the war was over, but deep nausea at what they had done. Oppenheimer visited President Truman and famously said, "Mr. President, I feel I have blood on my hands." Truman was disgusted and later called him a crybaby. The United States thought it would have a monopoly on nuclear weapons for decades. They were wrong. Inside the Manhattan Project, there were spies. A quiet physicist named Klaus Fuchs had been sending blueprints of the atomic bomb to the Soviet Union. In August 1949, the Soviets shocked the world by detonating their own atomic bomb. The monopoly was broken. The Cold War had truly begun. This triggered a panic in Washington. They needed something bigger, something stronger.
Edward Teller, a scientist at Los Alamos, had long dreamed of a super bomb. The atomic bomb worked by fission, splitting the atom. The super bomb would work by fusion, smashing atoms together, just like the sun does. This was the hydrogen bomb. Oppenheimer argued against it. He said it was a weapon of genocide with no military purpose other than mass slaughter. But he lost the argument. His security clearance was revoked, and he was humiliated by the government he had served. In 1952, the U.S. tested the first hydrogen bomb, codenamed Ivy Mike. It was 1,000 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The island it was tested on simply ceased to exist. The Soviets followed with their own H-bomb. The arms race spiraled out of control. We went from bombs that could destroy a city to warheads that could destroy entire regions. By the 1980s, there were over 60,000 nuclear weapons on Earth, enough to destroy human civilization dozens of times over. We entered the era of mad, mutually assured destruction. The only thing keeping the peace was the promise that if one side attacked, the other would ensure that both sides died. We lived and still live with a gun pointed at the head of the world. J. Robert Oppenheimer died in 1967. He lived to see the weapon he created become the defining fear of the modern age. The history of the atomic bomb is a paradox. It ended the deadliest war in history, but it ushered in an era where total extinction is possible at the push of a button. It is a testament to human genius and a monument to human folly. We unlocked the energy of the universe, but we have yet to answer the most important question: do we have the wisdom to control it? The fire that was lit in the desert in 1945 is still burning. It waits in silos and submarines around the world, silent, sleeping, but never gone. If you found this history fascinating and want to understand more about the events that shaped our world, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps us bring more of these stories to life.